March 1962, Palm Springs, California. Frank Sinatra stood in his backyard with a sledgehammer in his hands. In front of him, a brand new concrete helipad, yellow H painted in the center. Presidential seal of the United States mounted on the side. He'd spent $50,000 building it. Months of construction, built to exact Secret Service specifications for Marine One, built for one person, President John F. Kennedy, his friend. But the president wasn't coming. Not today. Not ever. Frank raised the sledgehammer above his head and brought it down with everything he had. The sound echoed across the desert. Metal meeting concrete. The helipad cracked like lightning, spreading across glass. Frank didn't stop. Again, and again, and again. His hands blistered, blood mixed with sweat. His shoulders burned, but he kept swinging. Because Frank Sinatra wasn't just destroying a helipad, he was destroying a dream. The dream that an Italian kid from Hoboken, New Jersey, could ever truly belong in the world of Harvard-educated, blue-blooded American power. Inside the house, the servants heard it, that terrible rhythmic sound of metal on concrete, over and over, like a heartbeat, like something dying. The butler stopped a maid from going outside. They'd worked for Frank long enough to know. When he's like this, you stay away. 1 hour passed. Frank lost track of time, lost track of everything except the weight in his hands and the sound of breaking. Finally, he stopped, not because he was finished, because his body gave out. He dropped the sledgehammer. It hit the destroyed concrete with a dull thud. The helipad was in ruins, the yellow H obliterated, the presidential seal lying face down in the debris like a fallen soldier. A young maid named Rosa watched from an upstairs window, crying. Decades later, Rosa would tell her daughter about that day. I saw a man's heart break, not from love. This was a man learning that no matter what he achieved, some doors would always be closed to him. But this story doesn't start with a sledgehammer. It starts 4 years earlier, when Frank Sinatra met a young senator from Massachusetts, when he believed loyalty could overcome anything. This is the story of how Frank Sinatra helped elect a president of the United States, and how that president destroyed their friendship in the most humiliating way possible. 1958. Frank Sinatra was at the peak of his powers. The Rat Pack dominated Vegas. Capitol Records was printing money with his albums. From Here to Eternity won him an Oscar. He clawed back from career death. But Frank wanted more than fame. He wanted respect. Real respect from the people who really ran America. The Harvard graduates, the old money families, the establishment. Because despite everything, Frank was still an outsider. Italian-American from Hoboken, New Jersey, his parents were immigrants. He had money and fame, but not acceptance. Not from the people who mattered. And it ate at him. No matter how successful, some doors stayed closed if your last name ended in a vowel. The mob connections didn't help. Willie Moretti, the Fischetti brothers, Sam Giancana. To Frank, they were guys from the neighborhood. To everyone else, criminals. Then Peter Lawford mentioned his brother-in-law, a senator from Massachusetts, wanted to meet Frank. Peter was married to Patricia Kennedy, the Kennedy family. Old money, political power, the establishment itself, and they wanted to meet him. Late 1958, a restaurant in Los Angeles. John F. Kennedy walked in like he owned the place. 31 years old, movie star handsome, war hero, son of one of the richest men in America. They hit it off immediately. Both loved women, both loved breaking rules, both understood power, but it was more than business for Frank. Jack Kennedy represented everything Frank had been chasing. Acceptance by the elite, a chance to be more than an entertainer, a player in the real game. Jack saw something useful too. Hollywood connections, entertainment money, and those other connections, the kind that delivered union votes in Chicago. They became close. Jack started calling Frank directly. Frank, I'm going to be in California. Can we get together? Frank would cancel shows for those calls. This was validation he'd been seeking his entire life. Spring 1959. A phone call from Washington. Frank, I'm going to run for president. I want you to help me win. Frank didn't hesitate. Whatever you need, Jack. I'm in. He hung up and thought about his father, about Hoboken, about being Italian in America, about all the times people looked at him like he didn't belong. And now a Kennedy was asking for his help to become president. Frank Sinatra was going to help elect a president. 1960. Frank went all in on Kennedy's campaign, organized fundraisers with Hollywood's biggest stars, raised millions, made politics cool for the first time. The Rat Pack became the Jack Pack. Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop, all campaigning for Kennedy. Frank worked with Sammy Cahn to rewrite High Hopes as Kennedy's campaign song. It became as much a part of the campaign as the candidate himself. July 1960, Democratic National Convention in Los Angeles. Frank organized the entertainment. The Rat Pack performed for 20,000 people. Mississippi delegates showed up, segregationists. They saw Sammy Davis Jr. on stage and started shouting racist slurs. Frank didn't react, neither did Dean or Peter. They kept performing, kept showing that Sammy belonged there as much as anyone. Kennedy noticed. Afterward, he told Frank, "Thank you for that, for not backing down." Kennedy won the nomination. Frank campaigned everywhere, not just coastal cities, the Midwest, the South. Everywhere he went, he told people about Jack Kennedy. But Frank did more than public campaigning. He made calls to union leaders, political bosses, and yes, to Sam Giancana in Chicago. The rumors were always there that Frank used mob connections to help steal Illinois for Kennedy, that without those votes, Nixon wins. Frank never admitted it, but he believed he was doing what was necessary. Election night, November 8th, 1960. Frank was performing in Vegas. Kennedy won Illinois, won the presidency by barely 100,000 votes. Frank announced it on stage. "Ladies and gentlemen, we did it. We elected a president." The place exploded. Standing ovation. 10 minutes of applause. Best moment of his life. January 19, 1961. Washington, D.C., the presidential inaugural gala. Frank's night. Kennedy gave him one job: organize the gala, make it special. Frank delivered. Ella Fitzgerald, Nat King Cole, Gene Kelly, Harry Belafonte, the biggest names in entertainment. Outside, a blizzard, the worst snowstorm in years. But Frank kept the show moving. This was what he did: turn chaos into magic. Kennedy and Jackie arrived late, young, glamorous, the future walking through the door. Frank introduced them. "Ladies and gentlemen, the President-elect of the United States." The place erupted. At the end, Jack pulled Frank aside. "Frank, this was perfect. Thank you for everything you did to get me here. When I'm president," Jack continued, "you'll always be welcome at the White House. You're part of this now." Those words meant everything. Part of this now. Not an entertainer being tolerated, an equal. That spring, Frank started renovations on his Palm Springs compound. Major renovations, guest cottages, security upgrades, special phone lines, and building a helipad, specifically for presidential visits. Frank spared no expense. This was his future, his relationship with the president, his place in history. He imagined Jack flying in on Marine One, the two of them by the pool, Frank hosting the president, the ultimate validation, proof the kid from Hoboken made it all the way. The helipad took months, cost a fortune, but Frank didn't care about money when it mattered. Standing next to his half-built helipad in 1961, Frank believed he'd finally made it. He believed his friend would be coming soon. He should have known better. Robert F. Kennedy, Bobby, the president's younger brother, Attorney General, Frank's worst nightmare. Bobby hated the mob. When Jack made him Attorney General, Bobby declared war. Sam Giancana, Carlos Marcello, Jimmy Hoffa. Everyone with mob connections became a target, including Frank Sinatra. The FBI had been watching Frank for years. Thick files, phone taps, surveillance photos. Every time Frank met with Giancana, the FBI documented it. Now Bobby was reading those files, and he saw the danger. Frank Sinatra was a bridge between the White House and organized crime. Late 1961, Bobby called Peter Lawford to his office. "Peter, we need to talk about Frank Sinatra." Peter's stomach dropped. His associations, Sam Giancana, the Chicago outfit. We have photographs, phone records. "Bobby, Frank's just friends with these guys. I don't care. The president can't be associated with someone associated with organized crime. The press would destroy us." "So what do you want me to do?" "Tell Frank to stay away from the president. No more visits, no more meetings, no more phone calls. It's over." "Bobby, Frank's building a helipad for Jack. He's spending a fortune." Bobby's face didn't change. "Then he's wasted his money. This is going to kill him. Jack is his president, not his friend. Frank needs to understand the difference." Peter left that meeting knowing he'd have to tell Frank that despite everything, the Kennedys were cutting him loose. Frank kept calling, making plans for Jack's visit. The helipad was almost finished. Everything was ready. March of 1962. Jack Kennedy was planning a West Coast trip, March 24th to 26th. He needed a place to stay in Palm Springs. Peter had to make the call. Frank answered on the second ring. "Peter, tell me you've got good news about Jack's visit." Peter closed his eyes, took a breath. This was going to be the worst conversation of his life. "Frank, we need to talk." Something in Peter's voice. Frank knew immediately. His stomach dropped. "What's wrong?" "It's about the president's trip to Palm Springs." "Yeah, what about it?" "Everything's ready. The helipad's done. Guest cottages are perfect. I've got the whole compound set up. Secret Service already did their security sweep." "Frank, he's not coming." Silence. Complete silence. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. Peter can hear Frank breathing on the other end. "What do you mean he's not coming?" "The president won't be staying at your compound." Frank's voice goes cold. The tone Peter's heard before when Frank's about to explode. "We had plans, Peter. I built a fucking helipad. I renovated my entire property. Secret Service cleared it." "What changed?" Peter doesn't want to say it, but he has to. "Bobby changed. Bobby doesn't think it's appropriate for the president to stay with you." "Appropriate? What the hell does that mean?" "Your associations, Frank? The people you know. Sam Giancana, the Chicago guys. Bobby's going after organized crime, and he can't have the president." "Can't have what?" Frank's voice rising now. "Can't have the president being friends with someone Italian? Someone from the wrong side of the tracks? Someone whose last name ends in a vowel? That's not what this is about." "Bullshit, that's not what this is about. This is exactly what this is. I'm good enough to raise money, good enough to campaign across the country, good enough to organize the goddamn inaugural gala, good enough to deliver Illinois, but I'm not good enough to have the president stay at my house. Frank, I tried to fight this. I really did." "Where's he staying?" Peter closes his eyes. This is the part that's going to hurt most, the part that's going to destroy their friendship. "Peter, where's the president staying?" "Bing Crosby's house." The silence this time is different. Not anger, something broken, something dying. "Bing Crosby." "Yes, Bing Crosby. Who didn't do shit for Jack's campaign? Who's a Republican? Who probably voted for Nixon? That Bing Crosby." Frank, I'm so sorry. I really tried. Get the fuck off my phone. Frank, please listen. Click. The line goes dead. Peter sits there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, knowing he just destroyed his friendship with Frank Sinatra, knowing Frank will never forgive him for this, knowing he deserves Frank's anger even though he was just the messenger. But there's nothing he can do. Bobby's decision is final, and Jack went along with it, because Jack always goes along with Bobby when it comes to politics. In Palm Springs, Frank stands in his living room, phone still in his hand, staring at nothing, all of it, everything, every dollar spent, every favor called in, every hour of campaigning, every compromise made with his own principles, all of it for nothing. The helipad in his backyard, built for a president who's never coming, and the final insult, the final humiliation, Bing Crosby, Frank's rival. A man Frank considers less talented, less interesting, less everything. A man who hadn't lifted a finger for Kennedy, and Jack is staying at his house instead. The message is clear. Frank Sinatra, despite everything, despite all his success and power and influence, is still not good enough for the American establishment. The WASP elite will take his money, will use his connections, will benefit from his work. But when it comes down to it, when it matters, they won't let him in. Because he's Italian, because he knows people from the old neighborhood, because he didn't go to Harvard, because his parents were immigrants, because some invisible line exists that Frank can see but can never cross. Frank walks through his house past all the renovations, the guest cottages built for Secret Service agents, the special phone lines installed for presidential communications, the upgraded security, all of it worthless now. He goes to his bar, pours Jack Daniels, 3 fingers, drinks it in one swallow, pours another, then he walks to his garage, finds what he's looking for, a sledgehammer. He walks out to his backyard, stands at the edge of the helipad, the concrete smooth and perfect, the yellow H bright in the afternoon sun, the presidential seal mounted nearby. Frank raises the sledgehammer above his head, and he brings it down. The first swing cracks the concrete. Frank doesn't stop. Again, again, again. Each swing harder than the last, his hands blistering, the wooden handle rough against his palms. But he can't stop. Swing. The yellow H starts to chip, paint flaking away. Swing. His shirt soaking through with sweat. Swing. His shoulders burning, muscles screaming. Because Frank isn't just destroying concrete. He's destroying a dream. The dream that talent and dedication could overcome anything. That loyalty mattered. That an Italian kid from Hoboken could belong at the highest levels of American power. An hour passes. Maybe more. Frank loses track of time, loses track of everything except the weight of the sledgehammer and the feel of impact and the sound of concrete breaking. Inside, the servants hear it, that terrible rhythmic sound. Metal on concrete, over and over. The butler stops a maid from going outside. Leave him. When Mr. Sinatra is like this, we leave him alone. They stand at the windows watching. This famous man destroying something he just spent a fortune building, swinging a sledgehammer like his life depends on it. Finally, Frank stops, not because he's finished, because his body gives out. He drops the sledgehammer. It hits the destroyed concrete with a dull thud. The helipad is ruins, chunks of concrete everywhere. The yellow H obliterated. The presidential seal face down in the rubble like a fallen soldier. Frank looks at what he's done, at the destruction, at the waste, at the end of something that never really existed except in his own mind. And the worst part? Jack Kennedy will never know. Will never care. The maid who watched tells her daughter decades later, I saw a man's heart break that day, not from love. This was a man learning that no matter what he achieved, some doors would always be closed. Not because he wasn't good enough, because he was never going to be let in. Frank walks back to the house, cleans the blood off his hands, wraps them in gauze. He sits in his den, pours Jack Daniels, puts on a record. One for my baby, his own voice singing about loneliness and loss and the long journey home. He sits in the dark, listening, drinking, and Frank makes a decision. Right then, the Kennedys taught him a lesson, a brutal lesson. Loyalty was weakness. Friendship was a trap. Power respected only power. He tried to belong to their world, tried to play by their rules, tried to earn their respect through dedication and work and talent. Never again. From now on, Frank Sinatra would do things his way, and if the establishment didn't like it, they could go to hell. Peter Lawford became the scapegoat, not Bobby Kennedy, who made the decision, not Jack Kennedy, who went along with it. Peter, the messenger, the go-between. Frank never spoke to him again, cut him off completely, removed him from the next Rat Pack film, Robin and the Seven Hoods, replaced him with Bing Crosby. Twisted irony. When Peter tried to call, Frank wouldn't answer. When they ran into each other at Hollywood parties, Frank would leave the room. Peter was devastated. His marriage to Patricia Kennedy fell apart. He lost the Rat Pack, his primary source of income, started drinking more. His career declined. Peter died in 1984, broke and alone. Some blame Frank, said Frank's rejection pushed Peter into the spiral that killed him. Frank never commented, never showed remorse, because Peter represented the whole Kennedy betrayal, and Frank couldn't forgive that. March 24th to 26th, 1962. Kennedy's visit to Palm Springs. He stayed at Bing Crosby's house as planned. The newspapers ran photos. Jack Kennedy relaxing by Bing's pool, playing golf at Bing's country club. Frank saw every photo, each one a fresh knife in an already open wound. He spent that weekend alone, at his compound, with the destroyed helipad in his backyard, drinking Jack Daniels and playing his sad songs on repeat. His staff knew to stay away, to let him have his darkness. Something fundamental changed in Frank Sinatra that weekend. The optimism died, the belief that talent and loyalty mattered more than bloodlines and old money. He got harder after that, meaner. The famous Sinatra rage, which had always been there, became worse, more frequent, more dangerous. But he also got more generous with people who stayed loyal, would do anything for those who stood by him, would bankroll their projects, pay their bills, take care of their families. Cross him once, even as a messenger, and you were cut off forever. People in Hollywood learned, be careful around Frank Sinatra, be loyal or be gone. There was no middle ground. And whatever you do, never mention the Kennedys. That was the unspoken rule. The subject no one brought up. The topic that would end a conversation and possibly a friendship. November 22nd, 1963, Dallas, Texas. President John F. Kennedy was assassinated. Frank was performing in Lake Tahoe. Someone told him backstage. He stopped mid-show, walked off stage, canceled the weekend. But he didn't issue a public statement, didn't call the Kennedy family, didn't attend the funeral. Nothing. People expected him to say something. After all, he'd helped elect Kennedy, organize the inaugural gala, been supposedly a friend. But Frank stayed silent because maybe he'd already finished mourning in March 1962, when the friendship died, when he destroyed the helipad, when he learned it had all been transactional, that he'd been used. By the time Jack Kennedy was actually killed, Frank had already buried that friendship. Frank's political allegiances changed completely after the Kennedy years, abandoned the Democrats entirely, started supporting Republicans, Richard Nixon, Ronald Reagan, Spiro Agnew before his disgrace. The shift was dramatic. Frank had been a Roosevelt Democrat, a New Deal liberal, pro-union, pro-civil rights, pro-everything the Democrats stood for. But the Kennedys changed him, made him cynical about liberal idealism, made him see politics as power and nothing else. So he aligned himself with strength, with the law and order Republicans, with the tough guys who didn't pretend to be idealistic. By the 1970s, Frank Sinatra was a Republican fundraiser, friends with Nixon, performing at Reagan's presidential inauguration in 1981. People who knew him in the early days couldn't believe it. What happened to Frank? How did he go from Roosevelt to Reagan? The answer was March 1962, a destroyed helipad in Palm Springs, learning that the Democratic establishment would use him but never accept him. The helipad itself eventually got repaired. Years later, new concrete poured, the damage covered over. But Frank never rebuilt the presidential seal, never painted another yellow H, just left it as an unmarked helicopter landing pad. Because it had never been about helicopters. It had been about belonging, about proving that a kid from Hoboken could stand shoulder to shoulder with Harvard graduates and old money. And that dream died when Jack Kennedy chose Bing Crosby's house over Frank Sinatra's friendship. Late in his life, occasionally, after enough Jack Daniels, Frank would tell the story. I built him a helipad, he'd say, spent a fortune. And you know where he stayed? Bing Crosby's house. Bing, who didn't do shit for him. Pause, another drink. Taught me something. Loyalty doesn't matter to these people. Talent doesn't matter. All that matters is whether you went to the right schools. They'll take your money, take your help, take everything, but they'll never let you in. Someone would ask, do you regret helping Kennedy? Frank would think about it. No, because I believed in what he stood for. Civil rights, progress, making the country better. But I regret thinking we were friends. I regret believing my loyalty meant something. I regret building that fucking helipad. The story of Frank Sinatra and John F. Kennedy is the story of American power, the establishment and the outsider. What happens when talent collides with privilege? Frank Sinatra helped elect a president of the United States. That's historical fact. His fundraising, his campaign work, his influence, all of it mattered. And when it was over, when the moment came for that president to show loyalty back, he chose Bing Crosby's house. That choice destroyed a friendship, changed Frank's politics, made him harder, angrier, more isolated. But it also made him more himself, more purely Frank Sinatra, not trying to belong to anyone's world, not seeking anyone's approval, just doing it his way. The helipad never saw a president, but it saw a man learn the most important lesson of his life, that you can be the greatest singer of your generation. You can be Frank Sinatra. And some doors still stay closed, not because you're not good enough, but because you were never going to be let in. March 1962, Palm Springs, a destroyed helipad, a broken dream, a friendship that never really was. Frank Sinatra, standing in the ruins, learning he was always going to be on the outside. So he decided to make the outside his kingdom, and he ruled it for 36 years. His way,